Hi, welcome everyone. Welcome again to another great episode of Wellness Wellspring Forum. This is a forum that brings together experts, different leaders in the fields of health and wellness to be able to discuss relevant topics, what matters most to us about our health. And today we are so excited to have you joining us. We want you to make sure that you know that this is a discussion and this is a conversation that includes you. So please feel free to make sure that you put questions in the comment section. Anything that you want to say, connect. We want to have a talk with you. And today we are so happy to be able to speak on the topic of hope and how that impacts our health. We know that there's a lot of research, right, on how, hope does impact our lives, and especially individuals that are challenged with health conditions. And this is even more critical in times like these when we're kind of still in the midst of battling the long-lasting effects of COVID and a myriad of physical and mental diseases and illnesses that are within our communities. I'm sure many of you can think of the many things that, we as a people really are challenged with. And today, the discussion is even more special, and I'll tell you why. Because today we are celebrating Juneteenth. And this is now a national holiday centered on reflecting and remembering the day when all enslaved peoples in the United States were finally freed. I mean, this came 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. Could you imagine the feeling of relief that those individuals felt back in 1865 when they finally found out that they were truly now free? What did that do for them? But how did they survive all the way up until that point? What kept them going? That's what we want to talk about today. We come away, and there's still much more to be done for sure. But today, this can be an opportunity for healing and connecting the hope and the freedom that we have and that we feel, and connecting that to our health. So I'm Christina Hunter. I'll be your host today as we have our discussion. We're excited to have Dr. Patrick, who will be our main presenter. He comes from the campus of Andrews University, and he is going to be discussing different areas on religion and spirituality and the impact of religion and spirituality on our physical health and our mental health, defining the science of hope. I mean, did you know that there's actually a science of hope? And then talking about research on hope in teens and in young adults, and also in our older adults. And lastly, what are the biblical thoughts on hope and spiritual connection? And then after he does his presentation, we're going to bring in Dr. Judith Fisher, Dr. Sandria Nixon, who is a DNP, Dr. Wolford Hunt, and then also a new guest with us today is Chaplain Brian Carter. He's a chaplain, he's been a pastor in New York, and we're excited to have him with us today. So I want to start off with a word of prayer. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I just want to thank you so much for bringing us here together today to talk about being well. And Lord, I ask that you be with every person watching, God, that you would allow the information that we talk about today to bring some freedom, to bring that extra hope, and to bring healing to their hearts, their minds, and their souls. We thank you, God, for giving us this opportunity. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay, so let's get started with Dr. Sublachik. So happy to have you today, and we're excited about what you have to present to us.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. The topic today is one that is of immense interest to me as a seminary professor, someone who helps people look at scriptures and understand the Bible and others and the spiritual principles that underlie those scriptures. And so we're going to be talking today, the whole topic is embracing a healthier you. That's what this forum is all about. And so today we're going to be focusing on the power of spiritual connections and then hope on both our physical and our emotional, mental health. So if you could pull up the PowerPoints, then we will begin. So let's go to the next PowerPoint, please. So in his book, The Power, Timeless Healing, The Power and Biology of Belief, Dr. Herbert Benson of Harvard University cites several studies that he and his colleagues conducted on the power of what one believes related to the body, to how the body responds. These are so interesting that you'll please listen carefully, because this is so powerful. So in one study of patients who believed that being treated with snake venom for angina, which is, heart pain, right, would be effective. So they believed that snake venom would be effective. 70 to 90% of those who believed that it would be effective saw improvement, snake venom. But when it was discovered that this was a bogus treatment that really didn't make any difference at all, the effectiveness went down to between 30 and 40%. Do you see the difference there? They believed that this poison would make them better, and it made them better. The power of what we think is so, so important. So in another study of women who experienced intractable or just really strong stomach nausea during pregnancy, and some of you women probably know what I'm talking about, they were given an unnamed medicine. In other words, they weren't told what it was, but they were told that it would cure their nausea. 100% of the women found relief, 100%, but they weren't told what it was. Do you know what the medicine was? It was syrup of ipecac. And if you know what syrup of ipecac is, it is used to cause vomiting when people need to vomit things out. And so the thing that actually caused vomiting in their minds, they thought it would cure vomiting, and for 100% of them it did. What does that tell us about the power of what we believe and how it affects our health? So the Bible says, as men and women think in their heart, so are we. In other words, the power of our mind is something that we need to understand. It is something that is so important. So the question then is, what is our faith built on? And is what we're believing the truth? And honestly, today, there are a lot of people who are believing lies, and their whole lives are wrapped up in believing things that aren't true. And we can see the impact of that all around us today. So let's go on to the next slide and begin by defining religion and spirituality. So the definition of religion is generally agreed on and involves beliefs and practices and rituals related to the sacred. Okay? Religion is often organized, structured, practiced within a community, but it can also be practiced alone in private. However, central to its definition is that religion is rooted in an established tradition that arises out of a group of people with common beliefs and practices concerning the sacred. So we have the Christian religion. And within the Christian religion, we have various denominations, each with a unique set of beliefs. But of course, we also have Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism and Islam and many other religions as well. But each of them falls into or can be defined by the same definition of religion. So now, in contrast with religion, though, spirituality is more difficult to define. It is a more popular expression today. There are a lot of people, for example, who say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And what they mean by that is I have a spiritual connection with a God as I understand him, but I'm not a part of any formal religious organization. Okay? And so, because the reason for that is that many people experience religion as being divisive, and certainly we know that historically religions have been oppressive in their nature. Some religions have. For example, if you look at the Crusades back in the Middle Ages, crusaders who were of a certain faith, went around killing other people who didn't believe their faith. And today, many people who see religious organizations diminishing or demeaning other people really struggle with that. And they say, that's not for me, but I'm going to hold on to my own personal spiritual beliefs. Okay, so spirituality is considered more personal, something people define for themselves, that is largely free of the rules or the regulations and responsibilities associated with religion. So that, that definition, these definitions came from one of the authors who has done more research on the intersection of faith and spirit and health than almost anyone else, Dr. Harold Koenig. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So we're going to take now a look at the impact of religion and spirituality on physical health. So despite spectacular advances in technology and science, 90% of the world's population is involved today in some form of religion or spiritual practices. In other words, the technology, the belief in science, a lot of people see that there's a tension between science and faith, and certainly there has been and there still is. But despite that tension, 90% of the world's population practices some form of religion or spiritual practice. And so, when you look at the population of atheists, it's only 1.9% of the entire world's population. So non-religious people make up less than 0.1% of the population in many Middle Eastern and African countries. In other words, there's a very high proportion of religion and spiritual practices there. Only 8 of 238 countries have populations where more than 25% say they're not religious. And those are countries where the state has placed limitations on religious freedom. Atheism is actually rare around the world. More than 30 countries report no atheists. And only 12 in 138 countries do atheists make up for 5% or more of the population. For example, in Canada, 12.5% of the population are non-religious. So let's go on now. So the impact of religion and spirituality has been researched for many, many years by folks like Larson and Levin and Vanderpool in a study back in 1998 and also 1992. This was the finding. They did a survey of many different research studies. Here are some of the major findings. Those who practice their faith actively experience a lower frequency of the following diseases. First of all, heart disease. Yay, huh? Systolic blood pressure and diastolic blood pressure are lower. Okay? Cirrhosis of the liver is less frequent, probably because there's less drinking. Emphysema, because there's less smoking. Fewer heart attacks. Less chronic pain. Lower cholesterol levels. Lower levels of stroke. A lower rate of kidney failure. A lower rate of mortality due to cancer. A lower rate of the need for cardiac surgery, a lower overall mortality rate. So do you see that faith, religion has positive effects overall on our health? Okay. In fact, and we as Adventists can really relate to this, there's an increase in longevity, an increase in positive health habits among those who take a look at practicing their faith regularly. So I want to take a look now at coping mechanisms and religion. Systematic research in many countries around the world finds that religious coping is widespread. For the general population, research published in the New England Journal of Medicine found that 90% of Americans coped with the stress of September 11th, 2001, 9/11, by turning to religion. During the week following the attacks, 60% of Americans attended religious or memorial services. And Bible sales rose 27% just because of that attack. I mean, even prior to the year 2000, more than 60 studies had documented high rates of religious coping in patients with an assortment of medical disorders, ranging from arthritis to diabetes to cancer. One systematic survey of hospitalized medical patients found that 90% reported that they used religion to cope, at least to a moderate extent. And more than 40% indicated that religion was the most important factor that kept them going. Now, think about that together with me for a moment, okay? When you're sick, or when someone, that we know is sick, how many of us turn to prayer? How many of us call upon our prayer networks and please pray for my brother, please pray for my daughter, please pray for me? How many of us turn to our faith and turn to prayer and ask our friends to pray? That is shown to be protective. People turn to religion as a coping mechanism more than anything else. So, having said that, let's move on to our next slide and talk about religion, spirituality, and mental health. Okay? Now, here's something important. Psychiatric patients also frequently use religion to cope. A survey of patients with persistent mental illness at a Los Angeles County mental health facility found that 80% used religion to cope. In fact, most patients spent as much as 1/2 of their total coping time in religious practices, such as prayer. Researchers concluded that religion serves as a pervasive and potentially effective, this is a quote, method of coping for persons with mental illness, thus warranting the integration into psychiatric and psychological practice. And I know as a social work professor, as a seminary professor, that in professional education now, professional social work education, even psychological education, we're encouraged to take people's faith, their spirituality into account when we educate our students, because so many people use that as a source of strength in their mental health. So why is religious coping so common among patients with medical and psychiatric illness? Well, here's why. Religious beliefs provide a sense of meaning and purpose during difficult life circumstances that assist with psychological integration. In other words, we try to figure things out, we come through things. They usually promote a positive worldview that is optimistic and hopeful, and we're going to talk about hope a little bit later. They provide role models in sacred writings that facilitate acceptance of suffering. In other words, it gives meaning to our suffering. They give people a sense of indirect control over circumstances, reducing the need for isolation and loneliness. Unlike many other coping resources, religion is available to anyone at any time, regardless of financial, social, physical, or mental circumstances. So now the connection between hope and mental health. So let's define hope. So let's go on into the next slide. The definition and science of hope. There we go. Thank you. So what defines hope exactly? So there is a theory called hope theory. And according to hope theory formulated by positive psychologist Charles Schneider and his colleagues, hope gives people the will, the determination, and the sense of empowerment that allows them to reach their goals. A large body of research on hope demonstrates its power to support well-being, even more so than optimism or self-efficacy, which is our beliefs in our own abilities. So the APA Dictionary of Psychology defines hope as the expectation that one will have positive experiences, or that potentially threatening or negative situation will not materialize or will ultimately result in a favorable state of affairs. So we have the hope that things will turn out well, huh? That's the psychological definition of hope. You know, we have the expectation or positive hope that things are going to turn out well. So let's talk for now about biblical hope for a moment. So I think that might be on the next slide. So hope is commonly used to mean a wish. It is the strength of a person's desire. But in the Bible, hope is the confident expectation of what God has promised and its strength in his faithfulness. So check out this scripture, Hebrews 6:17 through 19. Thus God, determining to show more abundantly to the heirs of promise the immutability, unchangeability of his counsel, confirmed it by an oath, that by two immutable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we might have strong consolation, who having fled for refuge to lay hold of the hope set before us. This hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast. So think about this for a moment. Now, hope biblically is based on God and what he said. In other words, do we believe that God is faithful, that God is powerful, that our hope is built on nothing less but Jesus' love and righteousness, right? That what he did, what he said, who he is, he can't lie, okay? That our hope is built on that as Christians. And so we have an anchor for our hope, a refuge that we can set our hope on before us. So this for us gives us a strong determination, as long as it's not used inappropriately. And again, the human brain, as we saw in some of the earlier studies, has ways of sometimes attaching itself to things which are not truly what God says in his word, but it's what we misunderstand God is saying in his word to mean. So we need to have a good, faithful understanding of God and of his word. So now let's go to teens and young adults and take a look at hope in their, what research says about them. So as we might expect in a pandemic, coupled in this country with stark political divisiveness and civil unrest, young people aren't particularly hopeful about their future right now. And this is something really important for us to understand if we're ministering to young people or our college students or wherever we might be. So a survey released in June 17th of this year, commissioned by the National 4-H Council and conducted by the Harris Poll, found that 70% of teens are struggling with their mental health. Furthermore, 65% of the 1,500 teens surveyed ages 13 to 19 said that uncertainty about the future was making them anxious or depressed. Now, one of the things that we have seen, not just in teens, but across the board in people coming for counseling these days, is a tremendous spike in anxiety disorders and a tremendous spike in depression, because somehow people are looking at the circumstances around them instead of looking where? At our anchor, right? Instead of looking at God and looking at the future and looking at the power of Jesus and his presence in our lives right now as our solid hope. So looking at our circumstances rather than looking at God is what creates that anxiety and even depression, okay? So on the positive side, however, 68% of teens consider themselves to be resilient, equipped to handle life's challenges. In other words, they can spring back, when adversity leaves, they can spring back and cope with it fairly well. Now, for young adults, let's look at that. A global survey of Gen Z Millennials conducted by Deloitte in late 2019 and early 2020 found that this age group's levels of hopefulness for the world and their future had gone down slightly from the previous survey. After the pandemic set in, though, Deloitte did a pulse survey of a smaller number of young adults. This time, not surprisingly, they found a significant drop in hope and optimism. So from 2019 to 2020, there's been a fairly significant drop in hope, again, connected to pandemic, connected to other world events, okay? So research over the last decade, the past decade or more, showed people who are hopeful, several things. Number one, are more likely to attain their goals. Isn't that good news? They do better academically. They choose healthier lifestyle habits. They cope with and recover better from illness. They experience higher life satisfaction and have a stronger sense of meaning and hope. Okay? Now, there's this organization called New Hope that impacts mental health with young people. So they conducted a study that I want to share with you as well. So their study was a meta-analysis of a number of different research studies that they found in the literature. This was done in 2017, okay? So Stephanie Griggs, who is the author of this meta-analysis, looked over 20 studies involving college students who suffer from high rates of depression, anxiety, and distress. Now, this was pre-pandemic, right? 2017. The study authors synthesized the research conducted over the past decades. Hence, they found 5 major themes regarding the role hope plays in our young people's mental health. So here it is. Hope is associated with improved coping. And I think if we go on to the next slide, you'll see this. I think it's associated with improved coping. Improved well-being is also associated with hope. In other words, the better I feel about life, about myself, it's associated positively, correlated with hope. Depression and negative life events are less intense for those who are hopeful. Having hope is a protective factor against suicide and negative self-deprecating thinking. In other words, I'm no good, I'll never amount to anything, life isn't going to go well. That kind of self-negative thinking, self-shaming. Hope is protective against that. And a hopeful person is more likely to engage in healthy behaviors. So, having said that now, let's take a look at a longitudinal study of hope and physical well-being in older adults. Let's look at that. So if we could go to the next slide, please, I think. Okay, we need to go to the next slide. Okay, there we go. All right, so hope is a topic widely discussed in the humanities and researched in the field of psychology. And And again, this is a study, a longitudinal study of hope and physical well-being that was in older adults from November 2020 in a journal called Global Epidemiology. And so the author was Caitlin Long and her colleagues. So here's what she says, that hope is a topic widely discussed in the humanities and researched in the field of psychology. To explore the potential public health implications of hope for subsequent health and well-being outcomes, they prospectively examined the relation between baseline hope and a wide range of outcomes that include indicators of physical health, health behaviors, and psychosocial well-being in older adults using an outcome-wide approach. Okay, they used data from the Health and Retirement Study, which was studied over 12,000, almost 13,000 people with a mean age of 66 years old. They did correlations used to account for multiple testing, and they controlled for a wide variety of factors, and including all outcomes. So here's what they found. A greater sense of hope was associated with, this is now in older adults, average age 66, right? Better physical health and health behavior outcomes on some indicators, such as reduced risk for all causes of mortality, fewer numbers of chronic conditions, lower risk of cancer, and fewer sleep problems, higher psychological well-being, increased positive affect, smiling, optimism, feeling good, looking good, increased life satisfaction, increased purpose in life, lower psychological distress, in other words, anxiety, depression, and better social well-being. A secondary analysis explored antecedents of hope, what came before it, okay? And they identified several potentially modifiable factors that increased hope, okay? These results may have important population-level implications for increased hope and in improving the psychological, physical, social well-being of our growing older adult populations. And we know now that our older population in the church and outside the church is growing more and more every day as our millennials get older, but certainly our Gen X's are getting older, and so those of us who are older now, we can appreciate that. So having said all of those things, I want to just reflect for just a moment and challenge us to think from a spiritual biblical framework for just a moment together and ask ourselves these questions. Where have I placed my hope? Okay. So have I placed my hope in a large bank account? Have I placed my hope in the things I possess? Have I placed my hope on my children, having lots of children? Is that where my hope is? Have I placed my hope in my church organization, as wonderful as that may be? Or have I placed my hope on the person of Jesus Christ and the promises of God to his children? Promises, I will never leave you nor forsake you, even when it looks like I may not be there, in the midst of turmoil, in the midst of oppression, in the midst of people still being hurt. Where have I placed my hope? And so I really want to challenge us to think together, and later on when we have an opportunity to talk and to openly share, where's my hope? Because research now confirms that which pastors have been preaching about for years. Put your hope in God, trust in the Lord. What the scriptures have told us for years, that God is our rock, our fortress, our deliverer, that he lifts us up and he carries us through all the years, that in all of our suffering, whatever that is, he's right there suffering with us, according to, for example, Isaiah 63, verses 9 and 10. So having said that now, I'm going to close my section and we'll move on to other presenters.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Sedlacek. That was some really, really powerful information, and it really kind of the ending question of where is your hope and where does your hope lie? I just want to remind everybody to put your comments in the chat, questions that you may have as you were really keying, zoned in onto Dr. Sedlacek's presentation. What are some of the effects of hope, or say lack of hope, that affected you in your life? And we're excited to bring in our panelists right now. We're going to have a kind of a round the table discussion and just talk about this topic. And I can start off with, what were your thoughts?
I'd like to start, as Dr. Sedlacek was sharing a few minutes ago, something that came to mind was the thought of this hope. We have this hope that burns within our hearts. Our hope is built on nothing less. Dr. Sedlacek talked about hope and our spiritual connection and how these things relate to every aspect of our lives, to our overcoming chronic illness, to our remaining psychologically sound. And I think it's really important for us to talk a little bit more about that. I'm thinking about people in hospitals, people who are in a place where they are critically ill. They've been dealing with chronic illness. And how do we, when we are in that place, in that spot, how do we develop hope? And maybe those of you from the panel who've worked with hospital patients, what have you noticed? What has been your personal experience?
I find as a chaplain that sometimes what we call religion doesn't work for patients. It all depends upon the patient's perspective of life. And therefore, I have to be careful that as I go to the bedside, I'm not allowing my espoused theology to become the basis of the conversation. I have to, at times, check my espoused theology and develop my operational theology, where I am sensitive to the intrapsychic reality of the patient. Because you meet a Scientologist who says, I don't believe in God, I believe in a higher power. Or you meet the atheist who doesn't have that belief system. So how do I reach that individual? And as a chaplain, I have to be able to journey with what Carl Rogers called offering that patient unconditional positive regard or constructive positive engagement, in that I'm there to journey with the patient, let them make meaning of their story, and as they make meaning of their story, to help them to identify meaning of the experience, the influences in their lives that have helped shape them, and the relationships that they have that they can draw upon where they can find. So as I engage the patient and explore, I explore with the patient not as an investigator, not as an interrogator, but as one who is there to journey with them and offer them support. And that will then evoke in the patient the feelings to employ what we call the clinical method of healing, the actions that have brought them to what have they left at home? What led them to this moment? And how can they look at this moment now and make meaning out of it? And in that meaning, then what actions do they need to take going forward? So in trying to get the patient to hope, you explore the theological issues. Was it abandonment? Was it isolation? Was it abuse? Was it a feeling of distress, guilt? Or what are the psychological, sociological issues that may be bothering the patient? So the patient's family of origin is important. The patient's family system, the patient birth, all of these things may have an impact on the kind of attitude that the patient brings to the bed. And as a chaplain, I have to be willing to let the patient explore those things so that they can make meaning for themselves. Because if I make meaning for the patient, then I'm fixing it and I'm rescuing them, and they never really embrace hope. They simply feel something is imposed upon them. But the hope, therefore, cannot be merely about Jesus. It has to be what gives that patient's intrapsychic reality a sense of meaning, so that it empowers them then to find the next level. Because if you do a feeling wheel, and optimism, hope would be in that middle wheel, which you want them to get to joy. You want hope to be the springboard where joy can return to this life. And that only happens if they can connect what are the resources that they have, what are the coping strategies they've used in the past, and what are the relationships that can help them to make meaning of the current experience.
You know, we're also told by research that hope can be taught. So there are some individuals, whether they're in a hospital room or they're somewhere else, who may not necessarily know what it is to have hope. However, it can be taught. And the question might be, how do you teach people how to have hope? Or how do we learn how to have hope? And maybe one of our psychologists here can help us to do that, to at least to answer that question, or perhaps Dr. Nixon.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to kind of piggyback off of what the chaplain said. You have to be very careful about regarding injecting, whether it be religion or your personal worldview on the patient. But for me, in all of my 25 plus years of being a clinician, I think hope for me is conveyed through how I care for them, how I speak with them, how I allow them, and someone put in the chat, to tell a little bit of their story and listening to them. And when they have a connection with you, that is how, for me, hope is sprung. And as I get to know the patient, then you can increase and build on that. In our fast-paced society, having so many patients, the whole goal is the dollar, right? And you go in and you see them for a few moments. And there's not really a space to develop that kind of thing. It sounds good, it's wonderful, but our census is the driver. But for me, I do take time, and I do employ or present myself in a space that they feel comfortable as much as I can. It works sometimes and sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, that's how I try and inject hope into their situation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nixon. I just want to take a second again to connect with our audience. You're watching right now and you're thinking, question, what is your source of hope? Take a second and comments. We'd love to see, what your experiences have been like. You are like Drs. Nixon or Chaplain Carter, who are worked with individuals and tried to find ways in order to inject hope, or to find someone else's source of hope so that you can help them along a healing process, along a journey to find success. Or what was it for you? So go ahead and definitely put it in the comments, put it in the chat, whether you're on YouTube or on Facebook. We'd love to hear from you. So Dr. Fisher, what are some other areas that we can pull on as it relates to finding hope and how that connects to our mental and physical well-being?
One of the things that really caught my attention as I looked at the literature is that there is a very strong correlation between experiencing hope and feeling healthy. There have been even some studies, as I think Dr. Sedlacek pointed out to those studies, where especially with cardiovascular illnesses, we find out that people who experience a lot of anxiety and heart conditions literally get to feel better and to be better as they experience hope. What we're finding out is that when people are hopeful, they have greater energy to literally implement the things that will help them to be healthy. So there's almost like a cycle right here where you experience some hope, it gives you more energy so that you can do more. And as you do more, you experience more hope again, and it keeps going and it builds up. Ultimately, I think one of the most important things is to realize that this hope, which regular psychologists, and I want to go back a quick second, Dr. Martin Seligman was a psychologist maybe a couple of decades ago, not too long ago, who realized that, and he's the one who talked a lot about learned helplessness. And he mentioned that, you know what, we're focusing a whole lot on the things that are not working well, on the negative things. Let's switch a little bit. And he started with positive psychology and started to talk about hope and optimism and looking at the strong parts of our lives. And when we focus on these things, in essence, we are focusing with the part of us that was created. Remember, we're created in the image of God, the creator of the universe. So this hope connects us with the God of the universe, and it empowers us to do what we perhaps could not do for ourselves. And when we mentioned a few minutes ago about learning to become more hopeful, we realize that we can do this. Our brain allows to do that. We have an amazing brain. There's something called self-directed neuroplasticity, which is the part, the system in our brain that allows us to learn, to expand, and to literally grow. It allows us to retrain the brain and to literally rewire it every single day of our lives. So even if we didn't have much hope yesterday, we can literally begin to infuse more hope in our lives and connect with the God of the universe. And in essence, when that happens, just as David Sedlacek mentioned earlier, it literally gives us a chance to live longer lives. It gives us a chance to live healthier lives. And then we become more optimistic, and it literally helps us to become better at what we do and to live a life more in line with what God wants of each one of us. And to me, I find this to be amazing.
May I add something to that? It's so important, the view that we have of our God. If we view God as a punishing God, who's we're to be afraid of, he's waiting to get us, and as many of us, including me, were taught as a child, if I stepped out of line, I would be shamed and punished, horribly, rather than reasoned to understand why I did what I did. Our view of God is so important. So what research shows is that when we understand that God is a God of love who's with us, who will correct us, but correct us in love, not in anger and hatred, not in rejection, but that he will be right there with us. That is so much healthier for the brain in terms of creating positive neural pathways, whereas a fear-based view of God disintegrates our brain instead of building our brain. So, Dr. Fisher, what you said was so important. Thank you.
I'd like to jump in as well and piggyback on what Dr. Sedlacek just said as well. I think that one of the aspects of hope that is really important for us to realize is that hope is almost contagious. And I have found that when I'm working with students or clients, people in general, and I am hopeful about their prospects and their outcome, they pick that up. Children who live in hopeful environments where parents think anything is possible, they catch that hopefulness. If you are around people who are depressed and hopeless, then if you stay around them long enough, you will find you start succumbing to those feelings of depression and hopelessness. And so choosing and creating environments that are filled with positivity and hopefulness really is part of what we need to do to help individuals who are in these spaces of challenge to become hopeful. Hope is also a synonym for happiness, because all the research has shown that when people are hopeful, they have increased happiness. And so if you want to be happy, you've got to be hopeful. People who are hopeless find that it's hard to be happy. And both of these elements are also related to a concept called resilience. And resilience is very tied to hope. So it's really important, if we want to be resilient and be able to fight back against the challenges of life, that we have to create environments that will nurture us and support us in being hopeful. And in so doing, that will build our resilience to be able to overcome and bully through some of the challenges in life. So hope is very essential. And I think that if we remember that we can all be part of the change for the people around us, whether we're in clinical settings or just in our families, that trying to create those hopeful spaces by being hopeful yourself about your outcome and those around you will have impact on the hope levels of the people in your sphere of contact.
Dr. Wilford Hunt, I really like what you said about creating hopeful spaces in your environment. Someone in the chat mentioned that laughter and time with loved ones brings me hope. And so when we're creating these environments, really what that says is for us to become more intentional, knowing that hope literally contributes to our being healthier, to our living better lives, then we can become a lot more intentional. And the more intentional we are, the better we get at it. Creating places where there's laughter, where there's time with loved ones, where we're remaining on the positive aspects of things. And something else that we're told is that, and that's backed up by research as well, that creating hope, developing or nurturing a sense of hope is also accomplished through our opening our hearts to become more grateful, experiencing or expressing gratitude, taking time out to look for the positive in our lives. And again, these are things that we have to do intentionally. And eventually, as we rewire the brain, it's going to become an automatic effort on our parts because our brain is just going to go right there every single time.
Well, let me pose a question to all of you. So for the person that feels as though are surrounded by negativity, you have people who maybe come from a certain background or a certain area or neighborhood or certain family structure or cultural dynamic that lends itself to either pessimism or negativity, challenge, feeling devalued, not feeling valued by other people in the society. And that sense of hope is essentially just non-existent. How did someone like that just get this hope piece and then start to be positive? Like, how do they even start? Where do they begin?
I think it's a challenge if you're in that I like to call it negative pit, and you're just surrounded by negativity in the people who are your closest, nearest, and dearest. But once you get the knowledge about how infectious this is, hope is, then your goal needs to be to get in contact with somebody who is a hopeful person. So usually, even in areas where people are generally hopeless, they will be able to point out one person who has a little bit of something that's motivating them, that hope. They are able to grab onto some hope. And trying to spend more time in that person's presence and begin to lessen the time in the presence of those who are negative is probably one of the ways to begin moving towards hope. It's interesting because hope can also be a synonym for God and for Christ, and it's the same thing. As we move closer to Christ, then things look better and we have better outcomes. As we move closer to people who are hope-filled and who are positive, I think then we get to catch some of that positivity, and then that then begins to grow. There are also groups of people. There are lots of Facebook groups and other kinds of online groups that people can get in touch with, where their whole focus is on something that is positive, healing, proactive, energy driven to create change. And connecting with groups like that is also very helpful in beginning to generate some hope in people. You just need to move away from the people who are just complaining and crying and doing nothing. Because that is a recipe. That's like a pit that just drags you down, quicksand. It just pulls you in. So you got to get out, grab a branch, and pull yourself towards people who are positive about something. It would be nice if they could be faith-based groups, but there are groups outside of faith-based organizations that have positive goals, and that they're pulling and moving towards growth and health. And so getting yourself connected with people and or groups that are doing that is one way to begin moving in that direction. And then also, of course, as I'd mentioned, being able to create and develop, connect with people who are in positive faith-based groups. That can be helpful, because there are some faith-based groups, unfortunately, that are not positive, and they're not going to be helpful. So the goal here is to connect with the positive, hope-filled groups, not the ones that are just spinning the same negativity over and over again with no outlet for change or growth.
Can I add something to what Dr. Wilfred Hunt said? Thank you. Those were great ideas. But there's one other small factor I'd like to contribute to that, and that is differentiation theory. And differentiation is how well is my solid sense of who I am. If I'm well differentiated, I am going to know what my values are. I'm going to know what my feelings are. I'm going to know what my thoughts and the principles by which I live are. But when I'm not well differentiated, what happens then is I'm susceptible to what other people think. If you think that I'm doing great, then I'll borrow from you my sense of value and worth, instead of knowing that I have it apart from you. And so the more I can develop a solid sense of who I am based in my identity in Christ, as well as, just my own really deciding, who am I? Who do I choose to be? The more I'm solid in that, the less I'm going to be influenced by negative people or people outside of me. I'll be able to say, well, you have a right to think that if you want, but I think this, and I'll be able to hold on to that better.
See, where I concur with you, because as a chaplain at the bedside, I'm mindful that the person I'm talking to has left a particular environment and will be discharged back to that environment. So if the hope is external, the hope may not be sustainable. So you have to get that patient to make meaning to that hope. And part of making the meaning is identifying the issues that may have robbed them of the hope before, and developing a sense of self-awareness, the discovery of self. Who am I? What are the issues that beyond the diagnosis, the medical diagnosis, what are the psychosocial issues or the intrapsychic issues that I have brought to the hospital with me?
Mhm.
Is it a sense of abandonment, isolation? Do I feel, am I carrying guilt? Is there fear? Is there joblessness? And as we explore these things, as we go into the person's cave, because most of us are afraid to go into the darkness of our lives, and we tend to bury it, suppress it, and it sits there, and it dampens hope because it does not allow us to find creativity. When you look at hope in a feeling wheel, energetic, creativity, excitement, sensuality, sensuousness, these are all a part of what hope engenders, leading to joy. But if I can't make meaning of the experiences that I've had in life, and as I make meaning of them, I need to be able to name them. Is it shame? Is shame robbing me of this sense of hope? So as the patient explores their life and make meaning and recognize the feelings that they're carrying that are robbing them of unleashing this hope, this hopefulness, creative energy that they have, then they're able to do what Kellen and DeBeer in the book Theological Reflection talks about, having people name the experience and the feeling that came with that experience. And as they identify the feeling, what is the image they get of themselves that comes with that feeling? That image then produces insight into who they are. What is my sense of self as you talk about differentiation? Who am I? And once we're able to get that insight, then what new actions do I need to take so that I can move away from the negative and now embrace the positive? Because if that self-reflection, that sense of self-awareness, the book, Judith Jordan, in The Connectivity of Connection, talks about the relational awareness. And as Dr. Wolford referenced earlier, resilience. Out of relational awareness and competence, we develop a sense of relational resilience. But I can't be relationally resilient if I don't know who I am, because I don't know my strengths. So in helping the patient to come to a place of hopefulness, one of my initial tasks is to get them to come to a sense of self-awareness. And as they identify, this is who I am, these are the issues that I brought to the hospital, these are the issues that I will leave with, and I can make meaning of the issues now so I can take a new action, then I give that patient a sense of hope, of empowerment, that they can go back to the environment that they left and no longer be governed by the environment, but now function within the environment without losing hope.
That's so powerful, Chaplain Carter. Thank you so much for sharing what your experience has been in working with patients. Just want to see, what were some of the things that you all put in the chat about what brings you hope. And one of these I love, serving others. Felipe Arthurton mentioned, brings me hope. The reaching out and sharing and connecting with humanity gives me hope. Sharing hope gives me hope. And that's awesome. And sometimes for a lot of us, we really feel it in the moment, but going in, doing things intentionally, bring hope to others will in turn bring hope to ourselves. And it's so important, as Chaplain Carter mentioned, to be able to find these motivating factors within ourselves, so that we are not just dependent on others, but continue to please put your sources of hope here in the chat. You never know, you may inspire somebody to try something, to connect in a new way, just by sharing what your experience has been. Is there anyone else on our panel who would like to share, this piece?
What you said, during the pandemic, at a time when, they were begging for vaccinators and people were, scarce and afraid and so forth, and not just me, but I was recovering from surgery, and I felt better, and I wasn't ready they released me back to work, and I kept getting emails regarding becoming a vaccinator, and I thought to myself, why not? Why not do this? And like I said, it wasn't just me. Many, many nurses who were working long shifts gave up many hours. And I went, and I'm telling you, vaccinated so many people, and I met the most interesting people. They told me their stories in that 2 minutes that they were sitting down, rolling up their sleeves, and it gave me such a sense of hope and joy and what it was giving to them as well. So not only were they becoming vaccinated and protecting themselves, but it was helping me, and I felt it helped me heal a whole lot, quicker. So yeah, powerful. When you reach out to others, it certainly has a wonderful way of paying you back.
Dr. Nixon, I agree with that 100%. Reaching out to others enhances for us the sense of community. God intended us to be in relationships with Him, relationship with each other, being able to connect. So when we're reaching out and helping other people and being a part of their lives, it certainly gives us a whole lot more meaning and enables us to achieve the things that we may not have wanted, we may not have been able to achieve prior to that. I want to just move a little bit more definitive about this concept of hope. The World Health Organization defines health as more than the absence of disease. All right, you can say, well, nothing's wrong with me. I don't feel anything. Am I really healthy? Not necessarily so. There needs to be something more. It's more than just the absence of disease, but encompasses greater feelings physically and mentally and socially. And it's literally a whole package. It's a holistic belief. And it also includes the concept of hope. And so one of the things that I would really want us all to be able to, if nothing else to leave out here, it is to remind ourselves that hope is a gift that was given to us by our Creator God. And we can cultivate that hope, each one of us. And even if at times it may feel difficult for us to do so, we have a brain that allows us to literally rewire itself and to come to a place where we can cultivate that hope. And something else I want to add very quickly, and that is that we've got to take care of ourselves to be able to really nurture this hope, because this is a holistic concept. We're talking about our bodies. If I am not getting enough sleep, if my nutrition is, and some of you may be familiar with the 7 laws of health and so on, but the idea is that I've got to take a look at what I'm all about. Dr. Sedlacek talked about that self-awareness. We talked about differentiation, and somebody asked the question, well, what if the people around you and your own family are that negative and you don't know what to do? The idea is that when I, as a human, get to know myself a little bit more and accept myself for the way I am and remind myself that I was fearfully and wonderfully made by the God of the universe, I develop a stronger identity. And this identity allows me to be able to set boundaries. I can reach out and help other people, but I can also be in a space where I don't allow them and their negativity to enter my life. And I can literally cultivate hope. And this hope will keep me in a place where I can become healthier and resist diseases and illnesses and claim by faith the healing that only God can give. And to me, that is powerful.
Amen. Amen. I want to thank each of our panelists for being able to add in all these amazing pieces of how the concept of hope be so powerful and so healing for us, mentally, emotionally. Speaking of the physical, I just want to take a moment right now to bring in Dr. Nixon to give us some updates on any COVID issues. Dr. Nixon, is there anything that's important for us to know as it relates to our wellness with COVID?
Yes, I'll try and make it as quickly as I can because I know time is fleeting. So some concrete things regarding where we are now with the COVID-19 vaccine and update. And before I start, I just want to say that this is in no way to shame those who have not gotten or received their COVID vaccine to date. This is just information, and we know that there are folks now who are trying to figure out their next step. So the things that I'm saying, I don't want to vaccine shame. I'm not sure if that's a term, but I'm going to coin it if it's not yet. It's mine. So the types of vaccine, just for a quick review, and many of you already know this, the types of vaccine that we have available are the Pfizer, BioNTech, and the Moderna, and those are both the two-step vaccine where you get one, you go ahead and get one, and then the other is approximately 3 to 4 weeks after. And then of course there's the Johnson & Johnson, which is the one-time injection. A lot of people are, and I hear this in my everyday, they're afraid of some of the side effects that they can get from the vaccine. And yeah, there are a few, but they're in no way comparable rather to getting the COVID vaccine and what you go through. So, you know, chills, some fever, perhaps some tiredness, headaches. When I received mine, I had some muscle aches and a headache, but it dissipated over a 48-hour period. And the other thing I wanted to bring out is that I know that there are different groups right now, and I heard this on CNN the other night. There is 3 groups, rather. The first group is they don't believe in vaccine. They've done their research. I don't care what you tell them, they're not going to get it. And that's a group that is very difficult to penetrate, and we just have to keep plugging away with education and so forth. And then there's a second group who is like, you know, a wait and see group. It's, you know, I'm going to wait and see if this vaccine causes any sequela with folks. And I may get it, I may not get it, but I am going to wait. And then the third group is, again, kind of a waiting for that herd immunity that we've heard about. Herd immunity is a long ways off with this vaccine because only 64% of our folks, Americans, have received at least one dose of the vaccine. So, you know, that is a ways off. And then fully vaccinated people, you're hearing now that you could take your mask off. But for fully vaccinated people, and if you know that another group is fully vaccinated, you can not wear your mask. And so what I'm trying to say to folks is use your best judgment. I work in spaces where people are not wearing masks, and you have no idea of knowing whether or not they're vaccinated or not. So while I am vaccinated, and I don't know if the camera can pick this up, this is what it looks like. This is the card that I received when I received my first one and my second one. Now, I do walk around with it, but I don't whip it out every time I go to Meijer or Walgreens or anywhere. But I don't know that the next person is vaccinated. So I am going to protect my neighbor. I still wear a mask because even though you're vaccinated, you can still receive the COVID virus and pass it on, although you yourself may not get sick. So I protect myself, but it is a personal choice. And as I said, use your best judgment with that. Masking, the CDC is saying now that masks are recognized as the single most effective tool to stop the spread. So that's what we have at this moment. We don't know how long the vaccine is going to last. Will we need a booster every year? That's still to be determined. The other piece that I want to say quickly, parents are concerned. We've now dropped the age down to 12. What do we know anything about the booster? It's in the works from my reading. They are working on it, and both working on how young a patient can be, a person can be, and get it. Right now, it's down to 12 years old and up. And that is it safe? And the short answer is yes. Many years went into studying this vaccine. I know it came together where they put it together really quickly. At least, it didn't appear. It was that way. Dr. Kizzy Corbin, who's well known, an African American scientist, worked with the FDA, and she was one of the lead person in the clinical trials to ensure that the vaccine is safe. I'm living proof that thus far I have not had any issues. My family have all had it, except for the younger ones that it's not approved for yet. So ages 12 and up, as I said, is okay to take the test. And the last thing I will say is, I heard our Vice President, Vice President Kamala Harris, speaking on it the other day, and she said that 5 months ago we were having approximately 195,000 deaths per day, and now we're at 90% lower than that. So from COVID, so. There's something to this, obviously. And that's the update I have. Please put questions for me. If I don't have the answer right now, I certainly will get back to you and let you know what the answers are. Good luck, and keep on studying, and each month I will bring more updates. I know parents are really concerned. I am concerned. I have a grandbaby that's 6 years old, and I'll be happy when she's able to get her vaccine, just like she got her mumps, measles, rubella, and all the others. So thank you very much, and I hope this was helpful to many of you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Nixon, for bringing that update and just sharing what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, and sharing this vital, important information and facts with our community. That is so important. Well, everyone, again, I want to thank you for being here today. The presenters were awesome. We want to thank Dr. Sedlacek especially for taking the time to really break down hope and its implications for us in our mental health and wellness, as well as our physical wellness, and the importance and the connection between spirituality and hope. Definitely, if you have continued questions, please feel free to, you can even put them in the comments, we'll still be able to read them. If you'd like to get in touch with any of our presenters today, I'll ask for them to put their email addresses in the chat if they're able to. But you can also email this forum. The email is Wellspring Wellness Forum. That is Wellspring Wellness Forum @gmail.com. And there you can, again, ask questions and connect with these great presenters. We continue to discuss the importance and value of health and wellness in our community. And I'm sure you're asking, are we going to do it again? Absolutely. So we'll be back with you again in July, on July 17th, Saturday afternoon at 3 p.m. right here at the Berean South Bend Facebook page and YouTube. And the topic for our next health panel is going to be the impact of marginalization, oppression on our health. How to stay healthy when you belong to a marginalized community. And this is going to be presented by none other than Dr. Carol Wolford Hunt. You don't want to miss this one. It's going to be really, really special, and I think a really good time to really connect in and hone in on those things that have oppressed perhaps you're part of a marginalized community, and trying to see how does that affect your wellness? How does that affect your mindset and your life? And what can you do about it? There's still hope. So again, we want to thank you. Happy Juneteenth. Take the time to either get educated about it or to teach someone else about it. And always be well. Take care.